In 2000, when the Korg MS2000 came out, 2000 and MS2000, it had a very severe competition. It had to compete with the Virus, with the JP8000, with Supernova, with Nord Lead as well. So that was very tough competition. All of those synthesizers were extremely expensive. So Korg kind of figured, all right, let's slash some stuff and offer something slightly different. That's exactly what they did. It was priced lower than the competition, which was great. However, it had a bit of a problem, its specifications. Polyphony of this synth is only 4 voices. Korg MS2000 had a couple of things up its sleeve, and that's why it's one of the important synths of today, almost 20 years later. When it came out in 2 formats, the keyboard format, which I'll be reviewing here, and also the identical but rack format. The only differences are no keyboard and no stencil printouts on the sides. In 2003, Korg released an updated version of the MS2000, which was called MS2000B. As opposed to the original, which was kind of teal, bluish, kind of color painted, this one was black. The only real difference was the inclusion of a mic input and a goose mic that was on the front panel, but that was on the keyboard only. The microphone was for the vocoder capabilities. However, there was no improvement in the vocoder, no improvement in the synth engine, just different patches and the goose mic and the mic port. This synth is a 4-poly bitimbral, 2 oscillator plus noise, 1 filter, normal ARP, 2 envelopes, 2 LFOs, and a very decent sequencer type of virtual analog device. Keyboard version has a 44 key bed, rack version doesn't, of course, and that's pretty much it. Everything else is fairly standard. One note though on the 4 polyphony thing, there is functionality to actually daisy chain several units, so you could in theory get keyboard MS2000 and get a rack version, and there is an option in MIDI pages to actually set it all up so that you can set one unit to be to play odd notes, the other unit would play even notes, and then you would actually get 8 polyphony, which then puts it into the category or closer to the category of its competitors. And that's actually quite interesting, because even with 2 of them added, then only then you approach the price range of the other ones. Of course, you have added rack space and all that kind of stuff and complications, but still the option was there. Physical design is very nice. It's quite beefy, very tall. It's quite chunky. All solid metal chassis, bottom and top, everything is just encased in metal, and on the sides it's wooden panels. However, the internal design is not that sturdy at all, and the units had some problems, especially with the surface mounted jacks, because this board is really tiny. And the jacks are plastic on the back, but they're directly mounted onto the board, and there's nothing. There's just, if you yank the jack or if you step on a cable or something, that's gonna rip right out of that board. And that is one of the problems, because the outside is giving you like the really beefy type of sturdy design, and the hands-on controls really want you to take it out and play in front of people and have fun. However, the insides are not really up to par to actually withstand anything like that. So there is a bit of a disconnect between the interior and exterior design of this unit. However, for studio use and normal careful use, it's more than awesome. It looks fairly beautiful. I like how it looks. The color, well, you either like it or don't. I actually do. I think it's an awesome layout to have the stencil printout of the functions on the keyboard version, and initially you may find the layout a little bit confusing, but literally after 1 hour of working with the device, everything makes sense, and you know just where everything is, and you're just off to the races and having some fun with the patches. Here it is, that's the general layout, and let's just get over quickly what's what. On the left side you got the synthesizer block diagram, also you have the vocoder block diagram, which again describes the signal path. On the right side you've got a complete breakdown of every single knob, button and menu/submenu function. So in essence, what you've got here is a printed out manual. And this is absolutely fantastic. I really love this. It's, I think, one of the things that makes this synth really special, and because of this section here, ease of use is absolutely amazing. Signal path, that's your audio in section. Power volume section, then we move on to oscillator 1 and 2. That all goes into mixer, as it says here. Then the mixed up signal goes into the filter, single filter. Once the filter is done, it goes into the amp, and the amp contains the distortion as well. And now you also have arpeggiator controls, have global controls here, virtual patch, effects, LFO1, LFO2, portamento, mod sequence, timbre select, octave, up and down. This here is combined control for sequencer, and these also are your envelope 1, envelope 2, control for effects and LFOs, control for patches, and these double as indicators for the sequencer, patch selector tools, and also in combination with the edit button shortcuts to specific menus. Before we dive into the shaping of the sound, it would be useful to actually just understand how to navigate around the synth, because it's a little... there's some menu diving, but it's actually okay considering how small this display is. So the way it works is basically you've got your cursor, left and right, yes and no, or plus and minus. They double as that, and then you have your page plus minus buttons. Right is pretty much exclusively for writing the patch, sequence, or whatever it is that you want. And then you got at the bottom, we got the edit button, global, and generally used exits. Global does what you would expect it to. So if you press global, you go into the global synth settings, and you'll notice that it says G1A. So that means that we're in global menu, page 1, submenu A. So if I go cursor, see how it's a little bit misleading. You say cursor, but you actually flip a page, and you're not flipping a page, you're flipping a sub page. So whatever. Here you have your general settings for the synth overall. That's why it's called global. Tune, transpose, velocity, audio in setting, and that's pretty much that. Then on page 2 you got your memory operations. This is where you actually initialize the synth as well. Then you have your MIDI settings, where you have all of your regular stuff: channel, local, pitch bend. Oh, and here's one thing that's really cool. Yeah, also setting the clock. Is it going to be internal or external or automatic? Now this is quite interesting. This one has two parameters called MIDI 1 and MIDI 2, and by default they are set to MIDI 1 is pitch bend, and MIDI 2 is CC01, which is the mod wheel. However, you are able to actually change this to any MIDI CC that you would like, or aftertouch as well. This is single aftertouch, not poly aftertouch. But this becomes important because these MIDI 1 and MIDI 2 parameters can be used in as patch sources. So that means that you can actually route two of any MIDI CC messages that you would like as patch controllers, and that's really cool and powerful. Then you can MIDI dump. Then we go page 4, MIDI filter. Yeah, are you gonna do program changes, control changes, pitch bend, Sys6, note receive, timbre select. So you can control that via MIDI as well, and that's by default CC95, but you can change it to something else. Then we have user scale, where you define every step of each note in the scale that you want. That's global, and once you're done, you just press exit, and that's that. Now that you know where to find these global settings, it's time to cover this important button, which is edit button. The edit button works in two ways. So once you press edit, you are in edit mode, and it works pretty much similar like in global. You can go through different pages. It says E for edit mode, and each one has different subsections. And we got, how many pages do we have here? we got many pages here. So you get 26 pages, which is quite a lot. However, this is a little bit different than global, because you'll notice that here in common, if we check it, it says, oh, we have voice mode, and it says mode, and it says single, split, dual, or vocoder. So if I go here to change it, it says single, split, dual, or vocoder. And now you begin to understand that this layout here is basically completely laid out every single parameter that you have in the edit mode. And that's really cool, because any parameter here that you need, except for utility, I think, you can find laid out here nicely. So for example, if I wanted to go for voice, I can see that voice assign, I would like, I don't know, trigger mode, that would be page or submenu 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we are. We're on single or multi, and it all corresponds pretty much perfectly. This is incredibly quick to pick up and actually work with. The second way of doing it is, instead of, for example, if I wanted to just go to utility directly, it would be stupid to just go 26. Instead, you have the shortcuts, and the shortcuts work while you press and hold the edit button, and you use one of these 16 buttons on the bottom. And you have common, voice, pitch, oscillator 1 and 2, filter, amp, EG, LFO, patch, sequencer, mod FX, delay FX, EQ, arpeggio, and utility. So basically, yeah, it says 26 here, but we got 16 here. How does that work? Well, it doubles in some places. So for example, for LFO, we have 2 LFOs, but we only have one shortcut to an LFO. Same thing goes for envelope, etc., etc. At this point, it would be actually useful to go through the utility as well. So we got initialize program, initialize timbre, copy timbre. So you can, because this is bitimbral device, so you can copy timbres between 1 and 2. You can swap them if you have one in 1 and you want it to be in 2. You can initialize the sequencer, you can copy the sequence, you can copy sequence all, you can swap sequences, and that's pretty much that. So for us, we want to start with the with an empty slate. So I'm just going to initialize the program. It says okay. Yep. Are you really sure? Yep. Right. We got a saw. So that's our default, and I'm just going to bring it down a little. Yeah. So let's examine the saw itself. So it's nice and buzzy, and it's quite beefy. You can see that the harmonic signature is quite nice, but more importantly, you see that little kind of sine beefiness on top before it drops off. It's quite cool. Each oscillator 1 type has 2 controls. It has control 1 and control 2, and for each oscillator waveform that you select, and there's like 8 different ones, or 7 because audio in is one of them, so 7 different ones, these controls are slightly different. Generally speaking, control 2 is linked to LFO1 modulation, and it's hardwired. So basically it hardwires LFO1 modulation to the oscillator control 1, and this measures the intensity, how much LFO1 intensity on the control 1 itself. And what does control 1 do for saw? Well, let's see. So we go, there we go. So it folds it nicely. But what's quite interesting to see is that they're not 2 identical saws. They're actually different. So it just gives you a very nice and interesting type of harmonics and a nice sound. Alright, so how does that look like when we enter control 2? So I'm not touching anything, so now we're letting LFO1 modulate, and if I change the starting point, then we change the starting point, right? So let's increase it a bit more. And if I wanted to speed it up, or change to different And you can get really interesting rhythmic effects this way. So that's saw. Let's now, yep, neutralized. So now let's check out the pulse or square. All this is actually PWM because nice and beefy square. Very cool. And I love that it has little peaks there that you can actually see. It's quite cool. So let's start adjusting control 1. As expected, it's pulse width modulation. And it goes to nothing. So you can have it super small. And of course, this is LFO control for the pulse width. And if I put it in the middle, let's increase the speed a little. There we go. So you reach the edges of both edges of the pulse. All right, next we've got a triangle wave. Go. Very nice, and I love that it's not too it's a little bit organic because it has some sweeps. It has a sweep up and a sweep down, and gives it a nice character. So especially very smooth. And of course we're fully open filter and everything. So let's check this out. What does the control 1 do? Similar to the saw, it doubles it. Right? Nice. And as expected now, control 2 affects the modulation of control 1. Alright, pretty cool. Now we get to the sine wave, and that one is a little bit different. Because if we get to the oscillator 1 control parameters and we get to sine, cross modulation depth, and cross modulation LFO1 intensity. So what it's doing is we have to introduce LFO, or we have to introduce oscillator 2 as well, because what control 1 does is cross modulate oscillator 2. So let's see here. If we have it like this, then I'm cross modulating with the saw. So that's cool. Next one, we got Vox Wave. This is basically like a filter type saw wavetable that goes through a filter sweep. So let's see how it sounds on basic sound. There we go. All right. And now when I change control, now remember, there's no filter here. This is just the control itself, and you can see that it's like a band pass with a bit of resonance on a saw. And of course, this works as LFO. So you can get really cool stuff as a building block. It works very nice. So even though you don't have two filters, you can compensate with this wavetable, or whatever you want to call it, here. So that's pretty cool. Vox is nice. And then we have DWGS, which is basically samples, and you have control 1 here doesn't do anything, and control 2 goes through all of them. I'm not sure. I'm going to display the number of them, how many are available. I don't remember exactly, but here's what they sound like. We have one more, which is noise. And this is kind of cool because it's a noise source, so you can't change the type of noise, but you've got a filter on it. So you got cutoff and resonance. Nice. And one of the patch points you'll see later is actually oscillator 1 control. So you can actually patch anything you want onto that. One of the patch points can be on control 1, which is very nice. And when you put into context that the sequencer can actually control it as well, then it becomes quite interesting. And of course you have audio in finally, and that's for vocoder or any other types of effects. Okay. So let's get to oscillator 2. That one's a lot simpler, but it also has some special things as well. Gone are the control 1 and 2. Instead we got semitone and we got tone. So semitone is a semitone control in relation to the oscillator 1, and tune is fine-tuning again in relation to oscillator 1. How do we control the overall pitch of the oscillator 1? Well, of course, you can do down-up on the octave, but if you don't want, you can go to the pitch, overall pitch control, and that's basically the control. So you can do -24 and +24. There we go. And that's basically transposing the overall pitch here. So let's go back to oscillator 2. And in oscillator 2, we have saw. Let's switch this. We have saw, pretty much the same thing, but it doesn't fold. Except it's not exactly the same, because look at this. You see how much more beefy this other one is? It has that pronounced little curve on top. And they are different. So when you actually play them together, they're different. This one is far more beefier, and this one is a little bit more thin, but it actually works for certain other aspects. So let's check square. Okay, let's compare that with the oscillator 1. Pretty much the same. Yeah, so these are pretty much the same. And we got a triangle. It has those curves, same as oscillator 1. Alright, so the only one that's actually different is the saw itself. So that's kind of fine. So you got these 3 waveforms to work with, but we also have ring and sync. So this is where you can actually introduce ring modulation, sync, and you can use both of them at the same time. It does what a ring modulator does. And you can get very nice sounds here, or super smooth ones if you want. And in combination with cross modulation. Alright, so we have a sync option, so let's use traditional saw for that. And when you use both of them, you can make it scream for help. Maybe it's not for help, maybe it's just enjoying it. One of the things with this synth is that you get lost really quickly, in having fun and making sounds. So it's going to be a bit of a struggle to keep on track here for this review, and that's why I'm like backing off, because most of these controls and everything that you start shaping the sound and creating it just really wants you to continue going and to create something fun. But I'm stopping now, refraining myself so that we can continue on and explore the other options. So that's oscillator 1 and 2 covered, and they go into the mixer, and the mixer has oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and noise that's not changeable or modulatable. Next in line, we've got the filter. So we're just going to use, for clarity's sake, a saw, and I'm using oscillator 1, the beefy one. So let's put something a bit more beefy so that we can hear. So first we're going to test the 2-pole low-pass filter. That's with no resonance. Resonance at 3 o'clock. Resonance at 6 o'clock. Very nice harmonics. Resonance at 9. So you can see how it hits those harmonics very nicely. It's a musical filter, as what they would say. However, because of its age, because it got out in year 2000, we have stepping. However, stepping is musical. It's at least stepping on musical parts, so that's kind of cool. And maximum resonance, self-oscillating. We have keyboard tracking, so if I put it to maximum, we can play it, but let's just tune it first. So, very nice. In the middle it is tuned, so... Okay, so it's weird. It's continually puzzled. It's a puzzling filter. It's a very interesting one, and you can actually hear the musicality of how it's been tuned. Now, 4-pole low pass. I've noticed that the last like 9 to 12 o'clock doesn't really do much generally at all. In low pass, nope. Band pass, nope. Yeah, so it's basically totally dead end from 9 to 12 for the cutoff frequency. Anyway, back to 4-pole low pass. 3 o'clock resonance. Sharp and smooth at the same time, very cool. Then we got 6 o'clock. Same nice harmonics. 9 o'clock. Already self-oscillating. Same here. So it seems like, yeah, already by 9 o'clock it's on resonance, it's self-oscillating primarily, and you lose pretty much all of the bass. As you can see, in spectrum range, it's totally gone. Okay, it's nice, has a character, but I prefer the 12 dB. it has much more juiciness than 24 dB, which is kind of weird, but cool. All right, low bandpass, also 12 decibel. Okay, 3 o'clock resonance. Six o'clock. Alright, it's nice and quacky, but for my taste, very subdued. Even for 12 dB, it's very, very subdued. Okay. High pass filter, 12 decibel as well. It doesn't go fully off. Let's try with 3 o'clock resonance. 6 o'clock. And 9 o'clock. Same thing. Alright. Actually a little bit underwhelming bandpass and high pass, to be honest. And I guess the four pole works, but the thing is that for me the star of the show is the 12 decibel low pass filter, which is the default, because it just sounds so creamy and cool. Very nice. Alright, then you have your keyboard track, minus plus, and we have envelope intensity. Here envelope 1 is hardwired to the filter and envelope 2 is hardwired to the amp. Next to the filter, then the signal goes into the amp, and in the amp we have our level. Naturally, we have pan, left, right. We also have a button to bypass the envelope 2 for the amp, so we can just use it as a gate. So let's set up some envelope here. Alright, so this is using the envelope, right? And this is with, so you can just bypass it quickly, which is quite nice. And then finally you have the distortion as well. And for that, let's use gate, and it's a fixed distortion, and there's no indication if it's on or off, but you don't need it because it's fairly extreme. So let's try here. That's without distortion. This is with distortion. You can see how aggressive it is. And it comes after the filter. It's not pre-filter, so very digital, very nasal, and very, very limited in what you can actually do with it. But it can growl. Interestingly, when you fully self-oscillate, there we go. Probably there are some use for that distortion, but it's not really, it's on off and you either like it or you don't. For me it's a little bit too digital and too extreme, so I'm not a fan. Next we can cover the envelopes, and as I mentioned we got envelope 1 and envelope 2. They are hardwired, there's no envelope 3, and you cannot reassign them to anything else. Envelope 1 is for filter, envelope 2 is for the amp. There's nothing special with them, they're just ADSR. There's no looping, there's no time between, there's nothing like that. So very, very bread and buttery, but they work. So quite fast. And release is long. Very long release. And let's see how big of an attack we have. quite long. Unfortunately, there's no, I'm not gonna wait, this is probably 20-30 seconds or more. Okay, let's try it on the filter and see how it works on the filter. I'm gonna use the gate here, so let's zero this out. And on the filter, alright, so nothing special, it's an envelope generator and it works. Next we've got our two LFOs, and they're almost identical. The only difference is that LFO2 uses a sine wave and LFO1 uses a triangle wave, so you can actually switch between them, and they all have the same types of controls. Alright, so now I've set up LFO1 to control cutoff of the filter, and now it's at saw. Alright, so it goes into the audio range. Square. Sine. And S and H. Nothing unexpected here, they all work as you would expect them to. The only thing that we should cover is now is the submenu options here. So if I go to Edit and LFO, here in the pages we have all of the options that we have here. So saw, square, triangle, sample, and hold, they all interactively change. However, you have the options of key sync on and off, so you can get those melodical kind of offsets as well, which is kind of nice if that's what you're looking for. Then we can tempo sync, and when we tempo sync, the range goes from slowest is 1/1 and all the way to 1/32. So not terribly long or terribly fast, but perfectly usable. And these types of options are pretty much exactly the same on LFO2, and the same range, 1/1, 1/32, and it's all pretty much exactly the same, except for the difference that you have sine wave instead of triangle. At this point, it would be also useful to mention that if I go into the edit voice, this is where we can assign, if we can choose if the voice that we're making is going to be polyphonic, monophonic, or unison. So monophonic is especially noticeable with the portamento, which is, suffice to say, super long. Very long. So get mono, get poly, 4 and 4 polyphonic, so it cuts out 4 and then cut it out. All right, and then we got unison. As you would expect, all 4 voices working. And you also have the option of going unintuitively all the way to the end. detune for unison. This is this shows only if you're already in the unison mode. So by default it's 10. So this is 1, 0. All the way to 99. Yeah, fun. But it is nice and okay, a little bit buzzy when you actually add quite a bit of it, but you can always tame it down a bit. But it's interesting to note that you can actually have see how much more punchy the 2dB is? Look at this. 4-pole, 2-pole, 4-pole, 2-pole. I mean, maybe it's just the case that it's louder, but it just sounds so much more beefy. So cool. Let's kill it completely. Growl, baby. It doesn't want to scream, it just goes digital. Ugh. Anyway, much nicer. Very cool and powerful. So, good boy. Here we have our little patch bay. We got 4 patch points. 1, 2, 3, 4. You select them by using this button. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you have your source, which can be envelope 1, 2, LFO 1 or 2, velocity, keyboard tracking, MIDI 1 and MIDI 2. Remember when we talked about that they are assignable? By default, this is pitch bend, this is modulation. So those are your sources, and they can affect pitch overall, oscillator 2 pitch, oscillator 1 control 1. Then you can have noise level, a cutoff, amp, pan, and LFO 2 frequency. So that's basically the essence of the virtual patch here. 4 patch points, fixed destinations and sources, works pretty much okay, except for the LFO 2 frequency, which I'm pretty sure I'm not getting something about this, so I'll just read up on that. Alright, next let's cover the arpeggiator. So first you got the tempo and gate. And let's see, if you're changing the tempo, it goes from 20 to 300. Let's get into on mode. Latch. One thing that's important to note is that unlike some other synthesizers, latch is not key hold, it's just a latch for the arpeggiator, so it does not double as key hold as well. Let's give this thing a little bit of LFO1 to affect cutoff. Okay, so we have this thing going on, and we can affect the gate. From very short to fully open, which is kind of okay. Then you can affect the range, and it automatically tells you which range you are in, because there's no indication here, which is kind of weird, but it works. And you can go to 4 octaves. You can have up, down, without repeating the end notes, with repeating the end notes, random, and trigger, which is basically. And we have some other options as well, only when we go into the arpeggiator, somewhere around here. There we go, 15, edit and press. And now we have the arpeggio up or type. Then we have initialize, whoops. Then we have range, got tempo, got gate time, which you can actually see here. Then we have key sync, which is kind of cool, which you don't have an option for as a button. You have to go into that one. Then we have resolution, which is basically the speed, and it goes down to 124 and up to a quarter. And we also have swing, and I think it goes -100 to +100. Yeah. So it's far more extreme than what you would usually get the 66. Or 50 actually you get as a normal thing. Yeah, 50 is usually the maximum. So it's quite interesting to see that it goes well past. Because you can get quite interesting and nice effects. Very pretty. And you can get effects almost like strumming strings on a guitar. And a slight delay, which is quite useful. So it's really interesting and a welcome thing to see that it goes past the 50%, which we're all usually used to. Unfortunately, there are no custom patterns that you can do for the arpeggiator, but that's why you have the sequencer. But before we get to the sequencer, which is basically the star of the show on this thing, let's cover the effects first. The effects on Korg MS2000, you have only 2 slots. So you have your modulation effect and your delay. They're very rigid. So there's not much that you can do with it. So let's just let's use something that's just meaningful. So you have 2 controls for each one of them. By default you have modulation, speed, and depth or feedback, right? So we can choose when it's lit, then it's delay, you're controlling delay, and when it's unlit, then you're controlling the modulation. By default it's chorus flanger, so it can go all the way there, and you're controlling the speed with the first one. So it can be quite nice. However, it's fairly locked down. And if we get into edit mod effects, here on the first page you can choose which type of modulation effects would you like. There's only 3 to choose from. You have the chorus flanger, which we have here, right? Then you have an ensemble, basically like a chorus of sorts. Old school ensemble. And then you have the phaser. Quite nice. Sounds almost like a 4-pole. Yes, what's up? Good morning. So Maka is now gonna play. What do you want to play? Okay, I'll help you. Let's go. We have pad, so we have phaser, and that's pretty much it. You get your chorus flanger, phaser, or ensemble type of effect. So let's turn that off. Then you can switch to delay, and let's switch immediately to delay effects. Here you can choose between 3 types of delays, and you have delay out here also describing it. You have stereo delay. Let's put it on. So we can hear a little. And that's just direct delay per channel. Then you have cross delay, which is the same thing, but it crosses left to right. And then you have the left-right delay, which is basically a pan delay. And the thing about delay is that the depth or feedback controls mix and the feedback at the same time. So if you go all the way to the maximum, it's going to be maximum volume or 50-50 and also maximum feedback. So fairly rigid as far as that goes. Other controls that we might have are basically tempo sync. So we can sync it to the tempo, and then you can choose your note, but then it goes from 1 whole to 132. So let's do. So now we have something going here to hear the modulation and how the feedback works. That's kind of cool. The depth is basically here, but that's it. There's no mix. And you'll notice that if I go to modulation effect, that's pretty much it as well. There's just speed and that's that. So very, very limited. That's not to say that they sound bad. They're balanced nicely and they're perfectly usable and it's really, really good. But they're pretty much bread and butter. For what they do it really well. However, if you want something more advanced, you can't do it. And also there's no way to patch any parameters to modulate the effects here. Next, I'd like to show you the Timbrality, how it works and how you can set it up, because it's quite powerful and can do a lot of things, even though this is a 4-poly machine only, but you can actually, if you think about it in different ways, you can actually set up something very fun. So let's just initialize all of this. So I'm going to go edit, utility, initialize program completely. Yeah, I am sure. So completed, we go out of this and we got our, oh, there we go. And by default, the Timbrality timbre select doesn't actually do anything. In order to switch that, we have to go to common, and there you have the first thing is basically mode. Is it going to be single, split, or dual? So split means that you can split on the keyboard and one part of the keyboard, and you define where the split is going to be timbre 1 and the other part is going to be timbre 2. Dual means that it plays 2 at the same time, and also you can switch to vocoder. Now you will notice that as soon as I'm switching from single to either split For dual, we have the control of these two. If you're checking out presets and you see both of these lit up, that means that it's a vocoder preset. I'm going to now set up the second part, which is really useful, and that's timbre voice. How is it going to be voiced? You can choose to have 2+2, which means both timbres are going to be 2 polyphonic. You can choose timbre 1 to be 3 polyphonic and the timbre 2 to be monophonic, or the other way around, timbre 1 to be monophonic and timbre 2 to have 3 polyphony. So you can choose pretty much everything that you want, and this is the split point if you're doing a split, where it's going to be. Let's make something very simple. So that's our timbre 1. But because I made it 2+2, you will notice that as soon as this works, but as soon as I press 3, it cuts out. So now we have, this is timbre 1, and same thing here. And then you can just edit this one to be something totally different. And you can affect the level, is basically how you balance them out. However, as you can see on the left side, both timbres now go into the modulation effects and the delay effects and the EQ in the end. So basically effects and the EQ affect our global effects. So unfortunately, there's no way to have separate types of effects on one timbre and another. So basically, I have not saved this. That's one of the things about it. If you're editing a program and it just goes, if it just goes, it's gone. Let's see, maybe I have it somewhere that's an edited one. No, it's pretty much gone. And there is a way probably to recall it, but you have just one shot. As soon as you change the program again, then it's totally gone. So the edit buffer is a little bit fiddly, and it's really, really easy to lose your patch. As long as we're talking about patches, let's talk about saving. So if you wanted to save a patch, you can just go to edit, and second page is the name. Editing the name is really painful because there's no rotary value here, so you just have to press and hold and just, yeah. Alright, so that's the name of my patch, and if I want to write it, then I'm good. So I just go write program A16. You could choose which one to write to, right? So you can just go like, okay, A16. I'm just gonna move my cursor to OK in order to confirm it. Press OK. Are you sure? Yes, I am. It's writing, and now when I'm out, it says, so if I'm drive bass, and then you can have, this is the patch that I saved. And now we get to the star of the show of this synth, and I think it has 2 stars. First one is the 2-pole low-pass filter, which is just gorgeous, and that saw wave here, which is really, really nice. But the definitive thing that actually makes this thing stand out is the sequencer. And a sequencer makes it so fun to work with and to actually patch around and have so much fun. Basically, these 4 patch points are great, but they're nothing compared to what the sequencer does. So how does it work? The sequencer, it's a 16-step sequencer, and you have 3 channels or 3 sequences if you want. Now, there are things that you can use or can't use, but let's just cover everything one at a time. So, first of all, you can choose to have one of the 3 sequences. And if I go into the sequence mode, it's going to be easiest to actually see things here. So it's a 16-step sequencer, but you can lower it to whatever you want. First things first, no, sequence 1, 2, and 3 cannot be of different length or anything like that. Basically, this is the common, and that's why it says sequencer common. Any of the common parameters affect all 3 at the same time. So that means all of them have to be of the same length. they all have to be of the same sequence type, which means they can play forward, reverse, Alt 1, which is basically like the same thing as the arpeggiator, or Alt 2, where it repeats the first and last note. There is no way to actually switch between those two, and also the run mode, which is going to be loop or one shot, is also common. Then you have key sync, is going to be per timbre or voice, and also the resolution itself has to be the same. So all of these parameters, which are in the common category, affect all three of the sequences. And basically that's, it has one sequencer, but it sends parameters to three different locations. That's how you can think of it. Now, while that is a limitation, you should know that it can, each timbre can have a separate sequencer. So you can have that, let's say, have a 5-step here and a 16 on a timbre 2, and you can get that nice kind of cool repeating thing, or a 6 and an 8, and you can get really cool things going on. So it is possible to do that. We're starting from the init program, and if I get into sequence, and let's go into sequences here. So when I go to the next page, you'll see that we have sequence 1, sequence 2, sequence 3. And basically all of them have the same parameters that I'm going to go through now. So first is, what does the knob affect? So it can be none, and we have 28 knobs, I think, 28 different locations, and that's really powerful. So we can assign each of the sequencers or sequences to affect pitch, step length. And step length is kind of cool. That's the step length of the sequencer. So you can assign, for example, step 5 to be faster than regular step. Then we have, it can affect portamento per step. So you can actually automate the portamento. Oscillator 1, control 1. Oscillator 1, control 2. This is awesome, because if you go to the DWGS, it means that you can assign that each of the steps plays a different wavetable, which is pretty cool. Then you can have oscillator 2 semitone, tune, levels, noise level, cutoff, and technically we can actually just go over the hands-on controls, and everything that you have a hands-on control, you can assign to one of these knobs. So let's just go key control, envelope 1, intensity, filter, keyboard track, amp level, pan pot. You have envelope 1, attack, decay, sustain, release. Envelope 2, attack, decay, sustain, release. Then we have LFO1 frequency, LFO2 frequency, we have patch 1 intensity, patch 2 intensity, patch 3 intensity, patch 4. So you can actually automate the patch intensities as well in this sequencer, and that's that times 3. So you can have 3 of these on each timbre, and you can have 2 timbres. So that means that you can have truly spectacular types of things going on. So technically speaking, you could have, if you're okay with going for just dual polyphony, you could have 6 different tracks of sequencers on 2 different sequencers in one patch, which is quite powerful compared to, you know, what you would imagine. And let's now just see how this thing works. So let's say that I want my sequence 1 to affect, easiest pitch, right? So I'm going to set everything here to 0, and then you'll notice also if I switch back, you can go, you can also switch between if it's going to be step mode or smooth. This means, is it going to smoothly go from one value to the next, or is it going to step into them? And then you have also the steps themselves. So you can affect each one of them, and you can step through them manually, all 16. So technically you could affect every one of them programmatically, but there's no reason to, since all of these buttons here affect the values as you would expect. Now, for clarity's sake, I'm just going to lowered the amount of steps to 8 so that we can go through these things a little bit quickly. And basically you start it off by pressing on. Initially you won't see anything, but as soon as you press a button, you'll see that it actually starts running if it's pressed on. If it's not on, it will not run. So let's now switch this to gate and keep a note, and I'm gonna keep a note here, and let's see. Well, I'm on smooth, so it's quite easy. And it's quite easy to actually make quite interesting sequences. So let's now add LFO1 to affect the cutoff. Make it slow. Okay, so let's say I don't want this to be a, I want it to be monophonic. And let's give it some phaser. So let's do mod effects, and then we just choose a phaser. A little, not too much. And let's give it delay, which is going to be set to left and right delay, and it's going to be tempo synced. And that works. So you could have it polyphonic, and then it actually will play polyphonically as well, but this is not a polyphonic line, it just won't work. I mean, I can show you. So if I just choose it to be polyphonic and I play then it works. But it really depends on your melody, what you have. So you could go you know. But for me, I like it this way. Or you can go unison, and let's give it All right, so that's kind of going somewhere, and now would be a good idea to save. So I'm just gonna go common page 2, and I'm just gonna name it something. What? I'm just gonna name it Wave Rider, and I'm gonna save it to A16. I can't cuddle you right now. See everything that I got here? I can't really do it. So just chill here a little bit. And then we cuddle. No, not cuddle down. No, a little bit later. Sorry, can't do it now. Alright, so this is now saved, and let's see here. Very nice and kind of groovy. Let's say that maybe sequence 2, I want it to be resonance, and I'm gonna make it, let's see how does it work with step, but I think smooth. Let's try smooth. Or step. Yeah, step. So you can get that. That's kind of cool. All right, and then maybe I don't know, and then sequence 3 can be, let's try step length. So this one's interesting, and if I now zero everything out, yeah, those 8 steps. Of course, if you have a 16-step sequence, you go here, but I'm waiting on the buttons to come, so I don't want to fiddle around with this. So I'm just fiddling with the 8 steps. So now, if I have this, and for example, let's just make it clear. So let's go to the step, let's say step 5 is going to be different, right? So if I make it long, see? And then you can actually on top add a little bit of portamento, and because we've made this monophonic, that means that the overall pitch is going to be blending while we are playing this sequence. So check this out. That's a bit more. A bit more. See? Until it gets to be completely crazy. And you can get insane things. Yeah. So you can do things for sure. Now, another thing that's really cool about this is that you can do you can control the control 2, and in most of the other wave types it's not that impressive, but for example for control 1 and control 2, remember sine is a cross modulation control, so you can step sequence that, and more importantly in DWGS you can control and step sequence the different waves. So let's now initialize. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now I have that. I'm going to switch it to DWGS. So this is my control, right? And if I now go to sequence, let's make it A8, and now get to page 1 and say that I want to control oscillator 1, control 2. So when I'm gonna press play, and now let's just try this. Okay, so that's kind of the setup that you can do, and remember you can do different 3 sequences on the different timbre as well, and that really opens up possibilities quite a lot. And I would like also to add that it's possible to individually control each timbre via MIDI as well, so you can just write 2 different sequences and just send it out and it all works. So this is pretty much the main kind of selling point of the synth, on top of the really good oscillator 1 and really good 2-pole filter. Alright, conclusion time. I waited 2 years to actually get an opportunity to bring this thing to life. Let me just first get most obvious stuff out of the way. I love this synth. It just wants you to have fun, it wants you to play, and as you've probably seen, I try to explore a feature and just kind of describe it, but before you even know it, you are flying around the controls and you're already shaping a completely new sound, and something funky happens and you start going on this exploratory journey and the music starts going, and it's just continually like that. That's the thing about this synth. It's not just once in a while. As soon as you sit in front of it and you put your hands on those knobs and you pump a little bit of volume, it's journey time and have some fun. I mean, what more could you ask from an instrument than an instrument that tells you, play, come and play me? I mean, that's pretty freaking awesome. There are bad points. Absolutely, there are bad points. However, for me, the 4 polyphony isn't actually a bad point. Stick with me. When you have an instrument that has a limitation, I find that an inspirational type of thing. Some instruments are just a limitation. This one isn't. This one actually just invites you to explore things in a different way, and they invite you to actually think about your patches in a different way. If you start exploring what this synth wants you to do with it, then it becomes extremely interesting, and then the 4 polyphony doesn't really matter. Polyphony is not such a big deal for me. Actually, I found it inspiring. What is a big deal for me is that the filters, apart from the brilliant 12 decibel low pass filter, the rest are extremely underwhelming. The 24 dB low pass and the 12 dB band pass and high pass are so weak, and they really don't have any character that I barely even touch them. Yes, they can do things, but there are things that can do this so much better, and there's really nothing special about them. However, the 12 dB low pass filter is absolute peach. It's super creamy and it's just really juicy. Effects are also limiting, but I don't find that to be a bad thing because they work. And they always complemented the sound, and they always helped the sound quite a bit. Whenever I was looking for something, I was able to find a decent solution to the effects that I wanted to have for the patch. So that kind of works. Even though on paper it seems quite limiting, in reality it works quite good. I love this synth. I didn't know what to expect. Unfortunately, it doubles with some other synths that I have, so I'm gonna have to do some back-to-back comparison to see sound-wise, is it going to be an emotional keeper or an actual sound keeper? Because fun and ease of use, absolutely. I mean, I just love this thing, but I have to think rationally as well because I have way too many things here. I don't want to keep piling up things anymore. Good luck with that. Either way, if you had any doubts about this synth, I hope that this video helped you. Yes, there are limitations to this synth, but what it brings to the table is absolutely spectacular. It sounds awesome, it's fun to play, and that sequencer is absolutely perfect. I love this synth. Double thumbs up for it. Catch you next time when we do another deep dive into one of these old beauties. Thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe, and see you soon. Bye.